There's 7 major vested interests in global warming. I just mentioned the media. I'll list them as number 1. They have a vested interest because bad news sells. Good news does not sell, and the media knows that, and so they build on fear. They only sell fear. The second constituency are the environs. As you've heard over and over again, global warming is a cash cow for the environmental groups, all of whom are basically socialist-led. Obviously, global warming is the best thing to socialize the world. The third group are politicians. Politicians want a crisis. They want a problem to solve. That's how they get elected. The next group, of course, is the United Nations. They want to run the world. I mean, global warming is the best mechanism for them to do that. The last 2 groups are our biggest problem. And they are, number 1, scientists, which get $5 billion a year in this country for research. And I don't think they're all liars. I think they tend to be liberal at universities. But if they're unsure of the outcome of a science problem, they might as well lean in the direction which will get them the most money. I mean, today, if you are a squirrel biologist, and you submit a proposal to study the impact of global warming on the sex life of squirrels, you've got a good shot at getting that money. So it's really a financial thing. Follow the money on the university campus. If you're a history professor not involved at all, you better keep and you think global warming man-caused doesn't make sense, you better keep your mouth shut, because you're affecting money that might go into the physics department or other scientific areas. And finally, the biggest problem today by far are capitalists. Capitalism is the greatest economic system there's ever been. Socialism sucks for all the reasons I don't have to tell you. We heard Václav Klaus at lunch. But capitalists are no better ethically than socialists. And right now, all 500 Fortune 500 companies have bought into global warming because they figured out how to make a buck. The nuclear industry is now saying, build nuclear power plants, we don't produce CO2. Well, there have got to be smart people among the nuclear physicists to know that CO2 is not causing global warming. So there really aren't too many pure people around. But the biggest problem of all are none of these 7 constituencies. The biggest problem of all are the man on the street, your friends and neighbors that don't have a horse in the race, a dog in the fight, who are just totally overwhelmed daily, probably 5 or 10 times a day, by somebody saying we've got to cap CO2 to save the world. In the course of a year, I address, as in this room, 18,000 people. And in every talk I give, no matter what the subject, I have an element on global warming. And I'm generally talking to just plain folks earning a living in some capacity or other. And when I get finished quoting that global warming is the biggest scam ever perpetrated on society, and when I conclude my few remarks and say that, or say it first, I get standing ovations. I understand how this is happening. I was a naval recruiter. I became an expert on what went on in our North Korean prison camps because it related to recruiting and how we taught young men that they should want to serve in the military. In World War I, in World War II, we were famous for escaping prison camps because the American soldier in World War II understood the principles of democracy and self-rule and individualism. By the time the Korean War came around, we lost that. So let me tell you what happened in the Korean War and how it relates to global warming. Throughout Korea, the prison camps were run by 2 soldiers of the North Korean army, and they held 600 prisoners. It only took 2 soldiers to hold 600 generally American prisoners captive. And they did it by setting them out in the courtyard 14 hours a day and lecturing them on how terrible capitalism and democracy was. Hour after hour after hour. All the prisoners had to do was just sit in the courtyard 14 hours a day and listen. That's what's going on now. So I went around and explained what these young people should have learned between World War II and the Korean War is why freedom is important. And as you heard Václav Klaus say, it's not about science. It's not about climate, it's about freedom. Now we have a few things working for us. We're not warming anymore. I've been involved in climate change for about 30 years. I'm totally convinced the fact that we no longer have any sunspots. We're entering a cooling cycle. It hasn't been warm since '98. 2007 was the coolest year in this century. January was the coldest January in 20 years. So we're kind of lucky that we have the climate working in our favor. However, it's going to be ignored for quite some years. The temperature will drop. There'll be no warm periods. They'll still find a melting glacier and a swimming polar bear. But we're going to have science in our favor. Another thing we're going to have in our favor, if you're investors and economists, I predict that the next big economic bubble, about 5 years down the road, will be all the green stocks. Solar stocks, wind stocks, alternate energy stocks, anything that's green building materials are going crazy because everyone's buying into them. Well, they mostly can't work. They mostly have to fail. And some number of years down the road, when the companies aren't making money and things, are not doing good and the clients are not benefiting hugely, there's going to be a huge bubble break in green stuff. So people will wake up a little at that point. That is a graph of X versus Y. And I think you can all see a lot of dots. And it's fairly obvious that the trend of all those black dots is from your lower left to your upper right. Will everyone agree with me?
Yes.
That's how science works. We take all the data and draw a line. The way global warming alarmists work and all junk scientists work is they pick out any 3 points that work for them, and the other line that goes from the upper left to the lower right is your junk science line. Well, I have yet to find a 5th grader that couldn't understand how they're being jerked around by the melting glacier and the swimming polar bear when there are 160,000 glaciers and we only have a record of 200 of them. And if those 200 water budgets, we know that a third of them are getting bigger and a third are getting smaller and a third are staying the same. The Enron philosophy of how they went about bilking the public. And they had 4 principles. Hide the data. Well, obviously, we know that the global warming alarmists are hiding the real data, ignoring it. The second thing is repeat a mantra. Act arrogantly and assume everybody who doesn't agree with you is just dumb. And finally, enlist all kinds of constituencies that have a conflict of interest to expose you because they're making money. Skeptics accurately point out that previous support of man-caused global warming requires the use of selective rather than comprehensive data, which creates a false assessment of man's impact on his climate. This assessment is repeated endlessly with the intent of literally brainwashing the public while appealing to our arrogant belief that we are equal or superior to the universe's natural forces. All the time hiding the fact that the major supporters of anthropogenic climate change tend to benefit significantly through acquisition of money and power.